So, keeping with the theme of 40 big blind stacks and looking at hijack against the blinds, we're first going to look at hijack against big blind here. And we can see that the big blind, if we use this handy equity graph down here, is at a range disadvantage. The big blind has 40% equity, whereas the hijack has 60%. Um, some of the hands strongest in the big blind's range, such as a shred of pocket nines and some two pairs, are going to have in fairness very high equity. We're seeing 80% equity here, uh, and some players I think falsely make the assumption of I have these really strong hands, I should just bet out. But the problem is that when we talked about range composition earlier, you sacrifice the strength of your checking range. Putting those strong hands into your betting range when your overall range is at a disadvantage, it sort of in, improperly fails to accomplish the goals here, which are to, you know, keep the whole range intact. We want to breathe life into all parts of all hands we can have. We want to maximize the possibility of all hands, sort of living their best life, so to speak. We have a 10-9-4 board here, by the way, two hearts, the 10 and the 9. So we see a check. And then because of how strong the hijack's range is, we can see here if we move along this grid, we're seeing all of the hands they can have. In the middling portion of range, for example, the hijack has bottom pair with a king kicker. The big blind has an open-ended straight draw. Now that's not a terrible hand, right? But we're at the middling portion. If we go to sort of the bottom 25%, we're looking at either a gut shot or like a backdoor straight draw, backdoor flush draw hand, whereas the hijack has two overcards. So these differences are somewhat distinct, and you can see here this like string of hands. It's holding over the big blind every step of the way. They're a bit competitive at the top end because the big blind can have some two pair combos, and they can even have a set every once in a blue moon. But anyhow, this is all to say that the imposition player here, when we're looking at their strongest hands, it's doing a lot of betting. We're mixing it up here, choosing between two different bet sizes, betting 3/4 of the pot with this entire range, and then betting 1/4 of the pot with this entire range, and not really doing any checking. And one of the things that insofar as heuristics go, we can see here is the 10 and the 9. These are pretty good cards, and the offsuit hands that this player can have, this region here of offsuit hands, they connect very nicely with this 10 and the 9. Now, something interesting about offsuit hands, right, is look at how many possibilities of queen 10 there are here. Now, queen 10 also is a pair, so we have 2, 4, 6, 8, 9 possible combos of queen 10. Whereas if we go to something like king jack, there's 12 combos of these. So with the offsuit hands, there's just more ways to make an offsuit hand than a suited hand. If we go to a hand like king jack suited, there's only 4 of those. So when our offsuit hands are connecting with the cards on the board, that's an incredible position of strength, because what it means is that we are unpaired significantly less often, and when we are, in a case like this, our unpaired hands are either two overcards or a straight draw. We could go back and forth between these ranges and identify the comparative components of these different subsets of the range. So for example, the imposition player here has an overpair 7% of the time. Now the big blind never has an overpair, right? That's already a pretty big difference. The big blind has top pair 10%. The hijack has top pair 16%. So those are all contributing factors to this equity disparity we're seeing here. If we look at the EVs on a graph, we see again, the hijack is kind of just holding over the whole way, and then they're competitive at the very top end. So because of that competition at the top end, it doesn't allow the imposition player to go completely buck wild. Like if we were to change this to 20 big blinds, I believe we will see I think we see some shoves for the imposition player. Yeah, so the hands that are in pink, these hands, they're happy to just kind of go for it all right now. Hands like Ace 10, that are very strong, and this idea of dynamicism that we talked about, the board texture can change a lot. These hands actually don't mind just putting all the money in right now. They don't always do it, but they do it quite a bit. Same with King 10, some Queen Jack, King Jack with a heart, overcards, backdoor straight, or overcards, backdoor flush draw and a straight draw. Even a hand like Ace Queen, sometimes going for this. Uh, these are quite relevant plays, and keeping with this idea of, we looked at 40, we're looking at 20, let's look at 30, let's see how things change. Uh, I think what we're going to identify here is another threshold and an inflection point, which is at 30 big blinds, we don't see any of the shoving anymore. So we know somewhere between 30 and 20 big blinds, the shoving as the imposition player starts to at least become an idea, and becomes more of an idea the shallower stacked we get. So we see more smaller betting when we're shorter stacked here. And one of the reasons, I think, is because if we look at the equity disparity, we have even more equity. So we need sort of less. We sort of want to keep our opponent in some sense, but I don't think that tells the whole story. I think another part of this is also that because the stack to pot ratio is lower, right? It was 38 and 6.1 in the pot when we had 40 big blinds. We actually need to bet big less often to get all the money in. So we're also more sensitive to raise because of the lower SPR with certain hands. Hands like middle pair, they really don't love getting raised, but with an equity advantage like this, you just kind of got to seize the day and take what's yours, which is 62% of the pot, and then more when you adjust for the fact that we're in position and those future betting streets. So this is just sort of one example of where equity realization really shows up in a very contrasted and significant way.